There are some topics we get asked about a lot. Maple syrup, compost and recycling, the housing crisis. Another big one, annual car inspections.
Do car safety inspections have any impact on road safety?
Do vehicle inspections make for a safer roadway here in Vermont?
Why do we have car inspections?
That's Keese and Mike Santos of Essex Junction and Julianne Jones of Derby. They submitted their questions independently of one another, but their curiosities are animated by a shared frustration.
My car failed inspection.
So I had a bad experience with an inspection.
Growing up in Vermont, vehicular inspections were always a challenge.
Vermont requires annual safety inspections for every car registered here. We're one of just 9 states that do this. We're joined by our neighbors, New York, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts. Also Maine, Pennsylvania, Virginia, North Carolina, Louisiana, and Hawaii. Delaware, West Virginia, and Rhode Island have these inspections every other year. And just to be clear, we're not delving into the world of emissions inspections here. That's a whole other can of worms. We're talking about safety, brakes, steering, headlights, etc. If you pass inspection in Vermont, they put a little yellow sticker in the corner of your windshield, a literal golden ticket. And if you spend long enough here, you're bound to hear whispers about where to go for that golden ticket, which car mechanics are trustworthy, and also which shops to avoid. And then there are those who want to take down the whole system. Hundreds of Vermonters have mobilized online on Facebook under the banner Vermont Inspection Protest Group. The Vermont subreddit is littered with people ranting about failed inspections and also swapping evidence to show why we should lose the requirement entirely. None of this has amounted to much in the way of tangible changes here, at least not yet. And so people like Keese, Mike, and Julianne have turned to us with skepticism and also to vent.
I was a little frustrated.
It's frustration. It's annoyance.
It just feels disingenuous.
And we all just kind of watch it happen.
Keese says when he was younger, he couldn't afford cars that were in good enough shape to pass inspection. And so he chose cars not for their safety or longevity, but for the inspection stickers they came with. Any car with a current inspection sticker would do. Like the Saab 9000 he drove his senior year of high school. The rear passenger door didn't latch. The front passenger door didn't open from the inside. And when you shifted into 5th gear,
it was just extra neutral, but it had an inspection sticker that was good for another 10 months when I bought it.
Keese can afford newer cars these days, but when he thinks back to the beaters of his past, he has a hard time believing Vermont's safety inspection program is actually making the roads here safer.
I grew up with unreliable cars, and at no point did the car inspection process make my cars safer or make me more reliable on the road. It just added a lot more stress.
And then there's Mike Santos. During one inspection, a mechanic told him his car needed new rotors and brake pads. Then he got a second opinion.
Went to a different garage and passed, and they didn't find any sort of issues.
Mike's like, really? Is this the best we can do?
It's challenging to have faith in a system where there are so many inconsistencies.
And finally, we have Julianne Jones. 2 years ago, her car was in the shop for some scheduled maintenance and an inspection. She was expecting a $1,200 bill.
And I went to pick it up and they said, unfortunately, we cannot pass your car until you fix the rust.
Rust on the car's rocker panels. It wasn't on the list of work during her scheduled maintenance visit, and it ran her an additional $1,200 to get it fixed and pass inspection. Which brings us to another gripe Julianne has with the whole system. She's lived all over New England, and she thinks Vermont cars are in a class of their own when it comes to how quickly they get rusty in the winter. She says she notices it when she visits her mom in Massachusetts.
You know, in the winter, my car is just caked in salt. Like, it's like the white, gross, I need a car wash every day. And driving down there, I'm like, what? These cars are so clean. Like, how do they stay so clean all winter?
She's like, let me get this straight. Vermont puts salt on the roads, which leads to our cars getting rusted faster, which leads to more failed inspections, which leads to expensive repairs.
It seems like a scam for the state to be able to get money.
The state does get a few bucks per inspection sticker, but the vast majority of the money drivers like Keese, Mike, and Julianne are paying to get their cars checked out, it's flowing right to the shops themselves. And that means those shops, all privately owned, have a certain amount of power.
A lot of shops you bring your car in, they're always looking for the biggest ticket,
Brave Little State is a production of Vermont Public and a proud member of the NPR network. I'm Josh Crane, and I'll be right back.
Support for Brave Little State comes from VITA, supporting business growth and innovation in the Green Mountain State. From agriculture to manufacturing, energy to food production. Find solutions that turn your business dreams into reality. Visit VEDA.org and see how VITA can help make it happen. And Sunset Lake CBD, a farmer-owned company crafting CBD gummies, tinctures, topicals, and more with Vermont sun-grown hemp. Products for people and pets are available for home delivery. SunsetLakeCBD.com.
In the early 1900s, as Ford Model Ts rolled off the factory floor and into people's driveways, the United States faced a growing problem: car accidents, a lot of them. And in the summer of 1930, New England states joined a growing movement to encourage car safety inspections. It was dubbed the Save a Life campaign. Vermont inspections were still optional at the time, and the state's motor vehicle commissioner, Charles T. Pierce, said he was gratified by the hearty response from Vermonters, according to a local newspaper article. But he also found it, quote, startling and beyond comprehension that inspectors found so many cars to be in such unsafe condition. It's hard to blame him. Of the first 4,000 cars inspected in Vermont, only 14% were found to be in safe working order. More than a third had defective brakes, and more than 3/4 needed the lights repaired or replaced. 5 years later, in 1935, Vermont passed a law to require annual safety inspections for all vehicles. Cars have come a long way since 1935, a time when second windshield wipers were largely an optional accessory to be ordered by mail from a brochure. And Vermont's inspection program has come a long way too.
So basically, this is where we can get into the whole inspection system.
I'm standing in a repair bay at Brian's North End Automotive in Burlington. Brian Meglin digs a tablet out from under some wrenches and papers on a workbench.
So this is a state issued tablet, okay? And so this is linked to a state network. Here, let's go back over here so we can get out of the news.
He leads me away from the garage and ducks into the lobby. He's a towering guy, and his four-legged friend roaming the entryway is no slouch either.
How much does he weigh?
170.
Pro tip, do not point a microphone at a dog, especially not a 170-pound English Mastiff named Potato. Anyways, Brian has 25 years of experience as a car mechanic and certified technician. And as you can tell by the name of the shop, he's the owner here. He wears a blue t-shirt that is somehow devoid of oil stains and a flat cap with a pen tucked into the side.
Just give me 1 second. Hello, this is Brian. Can you hold, please?
We're here to talk inspections. Brian says Vermonters should get their cars checked out regularly.
And so I agree with keeping vehicles safe,
And he says that the variable that question asker Julianne brought up, all that salt on the roads, that's a big reason why. It is harder to keep Vermont cars safe due to the added wear and tear from rough roads, long winters, and road salt.
Vermont, the crap that we put on the road and the quality of the roads definitely play an effect or play a role in how well these vehicles will hold up.
By the way, to Julianne's concern about it all being a scam, the state says it uses the same approach to salting the road as our neighboring states. But that's just for the roads the state maintains, like highways. The state says town roads, meanwhile, might be salted differently. But Brian doesn't agree with the way Vermont's current inspection program is set up. You know the stereotype that car repair shops are just out to nickel and dime you as much as possible? Brian can confirm.
You know, a lot of shops you bring your car in, they're always looking for the biggest ticket, you know. And so,
more repairs, whether they're necessary or not, the bigger the ticket. And he says the ambiguity of the state inspection program gives shops a prime opportunity to run up your bill.
is that a lot of the rules are left to the shop's interpretation of the rules, okay?
Too open for interpretation, too many unnecessary and expensive repairs. These are long-standing complaints about Vermont's inspection program. And a few years ago, the state tried to address what it considered to be ambiguity in the inspection manual itself.
The inspection manual used to be 547 pages, and the manual was condensed to 162 pages.
Dan Merchant is a lieutenant at the Vermont Department of Motor Vehicles. 162 pages. Sounds like a beach read now.
I mean, it's maybe, I don't know, half an inch, 3/4 of an inch thick, and the old manual was massive. Looked like an old Webster's dictionary.
The old Webster's dictionary version included a bunch of stuff that didn't directly relate to safety. With the new rules, you can no longer fail an inspection for tinted windows or for missing a front license plate, even though those are both technically violations of state law. The new manual is also more specific. For instance, a cracked taillight is no longer an automatic failure, only if the crack is big enough that water can pool inside and white light shows through.
It made it more definitive of what the requirement was as opposed to before. It was more open to interpretation before.
Interpretation is still part of the process. Take rust. Rust itself is not an automatic failure. It depends on the type of rust and where. The inspection manual includes phrases like rusted to the point that integrity is compromised, or rust that affects the safe operation of the vehicle. This means mechanics still have a good deal of leeway, which could mean nickel and diming on unnecessary repairs, but it could also go the other way. About a decade ago, a mechanic in central Vermont tried to do an elderly customer a favor and passed an old car that had rusty brake lines. A little while later, those lines burst. The people in the car were killed, and the mechanic was later convicted of reckless endangerment. Here's Brian Meglin again.
You know, I see a lot of crap out there, okay? There are a lot of cars that, in my mind, you know, a father of 3, I would not want to be on the road with some of these vehicles.
So not every vehicle should pass inspection. But Brian says if you think the shop that failed your car is forcing you into unnecessary repairs, or you just feel like there's something fishy going on, you don't have to trust what they're telling you. Instead, you can go get a second opinion at a different shop.
The amount of money that we make refuting what other shops say is astounding. Like, it's ridiculous. Okay.
Brian has even had a few experiences where what other shops say has looked a lot like straight-up fraud. He recalls one incident where he says another shop took an old rusty rotor off the junk pile and tried to pass it off as one of the repairs a car needed to pass inspection.
Paul, you remember the dealer that flipped the rotor over?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I can tell you exactly who that was, that's for sure.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's the stuff that we deal with, okay? And it's ridiculous that, you know, this is the reason why you have shops that are trying to overcome the stereotype, and it's a small number, and the majority of them are just out to maximize their profit in every which way, shape, or form, regardless of the person's financial situation.
So just to play devil's advocate a little bit.
Yep.
People listening to this, why should they trust you when you say, like, we're a reputable shop, but all these other places aren't?
Because I just tell people, if you don't like what I say, go somewhere else. Like, I'm not hiding anything, you know? I'm not trying to entice anybody here. All of my business is based off of word of mouth, you know, and there's something to be said by that.
But we don't have to depend on trust and word of mouth alone. As a backstop, the state of Vermont actually has a team whose job it is to make sure shops around the state follow the rules as they're intended.
Basically regulate dealerships, inspection stations.
Dan Merchant again, from the Vermont DMV. He's part of that team. Among other things, they basically inspect the inspectors.
Say, for instance, someone has a vehicle, they bring it in for inspection, and the vehicle fails inspection. They think, that the station is trying to charge them, for unnecessary repairs.
That person might just go get a second opinion at a different shop, like Brian suggested. But they could also contact Dan's office and file an official complaint.
Depending on what that complaint is, we may arrange a time to go out, examine the vehicle, and meet with that person. And then we would then go talk to the license station, here in Vermont.
If they determine the customer's complaint has merit, that is, that the shop was indeed charging them for unnecessary repairs in the name of an inspection,
and they can be fined for that.
The DMV can also issue warnings or, with enough violations, can actually suspend a shop's license or revoke it completely. Last year, in 2024, Vermont shops completed almost 500,000 vehicle inspections statewide. And from all those inspections completed across 1,600 inspection stations, the Vermont DMV handed out 115 warnings and 7 fines. The last time they revoked a license was in 2021. Hearing these numbers, you'd probably come to a different conclusion depending on how you feel about safety inspections. They could be viewed as evidence that shops are not taking advantage of customers as much as some suspect, or that the state isn't doing enough to enforce its own rules. But there's still the bigger question we're trying to answer. Are all these rules actually making the roads safer? That's after the break.
Support for Brave Little State comes from Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department, improving habitat in rivers and streams to help aquatic species like native brook trout thanks to public support through the Vermont Habitat Stamp. VTFishandWildlife.com.
Remember how we said Vermont is now in the minority of states requiring annual inspections? Well, you could say the heyday for inspection requirements in this country was in the early 1970s. That's when 31 states had inspection requirements, an all-time high. At that time, the U.S. government was using federal highway dollars to incentivize states to adopt inspection requirements. But ever since the feds took away that financial lever in 1976, states haven't had the same motivation to keep their programs going, and the total number of states with inspection requirements has been shrinking ever since. Oklahoma got rid of their program in 2001, and New Jersey did so in 2010. They cited, among other things, a lack of evidence that inspections actually improved safety. And according to a 2015 report from the U.S. Government Accountability Office, they were onto something. The report looked at crash data from the years before and after Oklahoma and New Jersey ended their inspection programs. And it found that the number of crashes involving vehicle component failures, things like brake malfunctions, they made up just 2 or 3% of all crashes when those states had inspections. And the numbers didn't change after they got rid of them, suggesting that car inspections really didn't make a difference when it came to these sorts of crashes. Unfortunately, for those of us who crave certainty, this isn't quite so cut and dry. A 2018 study from the University of Texas at Austin focused on Texas's inspection program, which was similar to Vermont's at the time. It found that crashes involving vehicles with defects were twice as likely to result in fatalities. In other words, inspections do improve road safety. And the researchers recommended that Texas keep its inspection program and even consider adding more inspection items. By the way, Texas did not take that advice. Earlier this year, it actually scrapped its program altogether. So, there's 2 different studies that have come to opposite conclusions, and there's a lot more where that came from. There's no shortage of data, but a lot of it's specific to one place or one particular variable. Caveats to everything. And none of the research focuses on Vermont's inspection program. Do car inspections make Vermont roads safer? Based on my reporting, I think there's a good chance inspections here make a difference in a relatively small percentage of situations. And people may draw different conclusions about whether that makes them worthwhile. Vermont's inspection program has been around for 90 years, and while the data about whether it improves safety paints a noisy picture, if you look at a map that shows states that have inspections and states that don't, it's clear that, like a lot of things, these decisions might come down to politics and culture more than hard data. Maybe that's why northern New England states like Vermont and New Hampshire still have mandatory inspections, while many of their cold weather peers like Minnesota don't. Lawmakers here do regularly introduce bills to reform or even repeal inspection requirements. And in New Hampshire, the same guy who used to run the inspection program there recently came out and said that he thought it was a waste of time and money. But for now, nothing has stuck.
What do you like about being a mechanic?
I like helping people. I have always been into cars.
Back in Burlington's Old North End, mechanic and shop owner Brian Meglin is waxing nostalgic about his biggest passion: cars. He especially loves Jaguars.
That was from a movie back in, I want to say, like 85 or 83 with John Candy. And I fell in love with this one car, you know.
I spot a red Jaguar coupe parked right in front of the shop. And I later learned it's not just red, but flamenco red.
Is that your Jaguar?
That is one of my Jaguars, yes.
How many do you have?
I'm not going to disclose that information.
Way too many.
Way too many.
Yes, yes, way too many. It's not only that, it's, the Land Rovers.
That's one of Brian's mechanics, Paul McCarthy. Brian says Paul will take over the shop when he steps down in the next few years. Brian's been managing this place for a while, and he tells me he wants to step out of the garage and into the classroom to school the next generation about car repair and working in the industry. But before Brian leaves, he has some advice for taking care of your car and your wallet in Vermont. 1. Brian says if you have a car, use it.
But not driving your vehicle is actually one of the worst things that you can do. I use a lot of analogies to help people understand, like if you want to live a long and happy lifestyle, eat right, go to the gym, stay active. And it's kind of the same thing with a car.
So you're saying people should do less exercise and drive more?
I think you know where I'm going with that, yeah.
Piece of advice number 2, seek a long-term relationship with a reputable shop.
If you have a good relationship with a shop that you've been with for a really long time, generally that's a very good thing, okay?
A big sign that a shop is reputable: it's not that easy to get an appointment.
We always tell people, like, if you can get into a shop during a crazy time of year, like tire season, like the same day, that's generally a shop you don't want to go to.
His final piece of advice: don't rush it. The law, here in Vermont, says you only have 15 days to get an inspection for a newly registered vehicle. Brian says reputable shops often book more than a couple weeks out. And even if you already have an inspection sticker, you might not realize it's about to expire until a couple weeks beforehand. I mean, I've definitely been there. If you're like me, you might be tempted to call around and take an appointment with the shop that can get you in the quickest. But Brian says waiting for an appointment can be worth a lot, even if it means spending some time with an expired sticker.
Okay? Don't feel forced to go to a less reputable shop just to get a sticker. Okay? And too many people make that mistake, and it forces them into high-dollar repairs that probably aren't necessary.
As for the future of vehicle inspections here in Vermont, just this past legislative session, lawmakers introduced 4 new bills to reform the state's inspection requirement. And, drumroll please, none of them went anywhere. In other words, you're probably going to need to get a car inspection next year, and the year after that. So, buckle up. Thanks for listening to the show, and thanks to Keese, Mike, and Julianne for the great questions. If you want more stories about Vermont, Vermonters, and the surrounding region, make sure to subscribe or follow the show in Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your other favorite podcast app. New episodes come out every other week, and we've got more than 180 episodes that are already right there waiting for you, maybe for your next road trip. This episode was reported by me, Josh Crane, editing and additional production from the rest of the BLS team, that's Sabine Pooks and Burgess Brown. Our intern is Catherine Morrissey. Angela Evansy is our executive producer. Theme music by Ty Gibbons. Other music by Blue Dot Sessions. Special thanks to Rick Green, Steve Belitsos, Brian Chase, Drew Cline, Pete Hirschfeld, Abagael Giles, Joey Palumbo, April McCullum, Melody Bodette, Mike Dunn, Andrea Laurion, Lola Duffort, Amy Tatko, Scott Davidson, Jeremy Reed, and Ernie Patnoe. Brave Little State is a production of Vermont Public and a proud member of the NPR network. Thanks for listening.
Planet Money helps you understand the economy. We find the people at the center of the story.
Garbage in New York, that was like a controlled substance.
We show you how money influences everything.
Tell me what you like by telling me how you spend your money.
And we dig until we get answers.
I had a bad feeling you were going to bring that up.
Planet Money finds out. All you have to do is listen. The Planet Money Podcast from NPR.